Hello, welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Lamentations 1 and 2. Now, the word lamentation is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. And so this is a unique 5-poem book by an anonymous author who survived the siege and the exile of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and he's reflecting back with this passionate expression of grief and sorrow. This was the worst disaster in Israel's history to this point. Remember, God had promised Israel the land to Abraham. He had given David victory so that Jerusalem could become the capital, and from David was this royal line of kings. And God's presence was there in the temple. It was a glorious season in Israel's history. And then after 500 years of the summer of 587 BC, the city fell to Babylon. It was decimated. It was gone. And so this book is a memorial to the pain that the Israelites experienced following that suffering. So it's hugely emotive. It's hugely sorrowful, and basically it gives dignity and it gives credence to the pain and the sorrow and the suffering of the Israelites. And so the design is very intentional. There are 4 acrostic chapters. Now, acrostic, basically, remember from the book of Psalms, each poetic verse begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so if you notice, just a quick skimming through the books there, each chapter is 22 verses because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So 22 for chapter 1, 22 for chapter 2, and then chapter 3, it does it 3 times. So there's 66 verses, and then 22 for chapters 4 and 5. It's extremely ordered. It's almost in stark contrast to the chaos of the grief and the pain and the suffering. It's almost like the author is trying to make sense of the suffering that Israel went through. And so this book, really, if you're going through a tough time, if you've lost your job and your world around you is falling apart, reading through Lamentations should help you, because unlike what many people think, you don't have to put up a brave face, pretend everything's fine, name it and claim it, and pretend that you're the victor. No, this is really letting it all out to God. It says here in chapter 1, how like a widow she is, who once was great among the nations, she who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. And so the focus in chapter 1 of grief is comparing Israel, or calling Israel this grieving widow called Lady Zion. So basically, Jerusalem is personified as a widow. She's also called the daughter of Zion, and she sits alone. I'm sitting here on a rocking chair on our veranda. I can imagine a widow sitting on a rocking chair, contemplating life, grieving, nobody to help her, nobody to comfort her. She's sitting alone, and then she speaks, and this is what she asks God to recognize her pain. And she's basically saying, my pain can only be expressed in terms of a funeral and the death of a loved one. I feel like a widow. I feel like everything is being taken from me. This is the way grief is expressed. Then in chapter 2, the focus shifts to the wrath of God. The Lord is an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel, is what the writer is saying in this particular poem. And so he says the fall of Jerusalem is because of the wrath of God. Now, the wrath of God by the Bible writers is not described as this, spontaneous combustion of irrational emotion that comes from God. No. It's the word that's used to describe God's justice. You see, Israel had entered into a covenant with God, but for centuries had violated it with injustice and violence and treating the poor badly. And so God is slow to anger, we know that, but eventually he does get angry with human evil and he judges it. And in this particular instance, he judged Israel by sending the Babylonians. He punished Israel by sending the Babylonians. And then it ends by saying, basically, I know that God's discipline is justified, but he's pleading for God to show compassion one more time. And so this book of Lamentations really has this setting of pain and suffering. And it gives justification for us who are going through a tough time to come before God and to explain to him how we're feeling, what we're feeling, and ask him for help.